back, everybody, to Integrate Yourself. We're your hosts, Allison Pillow and Maya Gottlieb. You can find me, Allison, at pureenergypdx.com, and you can find Maya at mayagottlieb.com. We're here today with Jay Feldman. He is an independent researcher, and he graduated with honors from the University of Miami with degrees in Neuroscience and Exercise Physiology. And he helps people struggling with chronic conditions and weight loss to get back in control of their health. Welcome, Jay, to our show. Thanks so much for coming on.
Thank you guys so much for having me.
Yeah, we're really grateful that you contacted us, because I feel like you're definitely in line with what we teach people and what we talk about when it comes to nutrition. Would you do me a favor, or do us a favor, and give everybody a little bit about your background and a little bit more about your journey and how you discovered a more Ray-Peat-inspired nutrition approach, as well as like looking at it from the bioenergetic view of the metabolism and how that works, and applying that to nutrition and helping people that way.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I've always been interested in nutrition, and like a lot of others who have found Ray Peat's work, we've kind of meandered through a lot of different nutrition modalities, you could say, to get there. And so I was always interested in from a fitness perspective, and just trying to eat healthy and stay lean, build muscle. And from there, the passion grew. And as I looked more into nutrition as a whole, I came across some alternative health modalities, and found paleo, found ketogenic diets, found intermittent fasting. And as I dove deeper into that, I found I ended up with more and more health problems. And from there, I ended up finding Ray Peat's work, and completely changed the way I think about health and nutrition and physiology.
Awesome.
So did you have any wowsies, any things that changed all of a sudden that made you kind of be very aware that this was kind of working for you? And, can you give us a little background on your personal journey of what happened to you as you try to transition into the Ray world, Ray
Like
Peat
an
world?
aha moment kind of thing, right?
Yeah. Well, there's definitely a bunch of those, but I would say so. One thing was that I was just chronically under eating, and some of it was purposeful. I was trying to stay lean, and that was what we're told to do. We're told you just eat fewer calories and the fat melts off.
Mm-hmm.
And not only did it not work that way, but I just didn't, I didn't feel good, and I was constantly restricting myself. And that was definitely the biggest change is going from this constant feeling of restraint and hunger, and feeling like this fight against food, and then this transition to understanding that we don't need to be avoiding food, and hunger is there for a reason. It's there to tell us that we need to eat. And
Right.
giving myself yeah, right. Giving myself that kind of freedom to eat, especially carbohydrates. That was one of the biggest one, coming from a low carb keto diet. But so starting to eat carbohydrates, that was a big one, and just starting to eat more, and the feeling of freedom after that was the biggest change for me. Was just this constant weight that's always there, the hunger and restriction weight, and or even with intermittent fasting, just not eating for a certain window of time, and allowing myself to eat when I was actually hungry and give myself enough fuel. That was definitely the biggest difference.
Well, I really like speaking to different people about their journeys, because a lot of people have different symptoms, different ways of kind of having their story come about. And, one of the things that you talked about, it just is really important, is how people really don't see how they're restricting their diet. Like, they're restricting their diet, but they're also restricting the calorie intake and thinking that's the right amount. The theory of calorie in versus calorie out. And this whole dichotomy is kind of turning itself on its head when you realize like what stress is doing to the body and the mitochondria, and how the body is actually needing more than you think. This body is allowing itself to fix itself while you're under eating and causing the bank account to go into the debt, right?
Yeah,
Mhm.
right.
And so then part of you just doesn't get it until you're totally exhausted. Maybe years have gone by and you're still going, why do I have these symptoms? Why do I feel bad? So it's really great to hear these stories, to see what's happening to people as they start to progress through the changes of eating more, just simply eating more for their body.
Hmm. Yeah, the signs of low energy are not really obvious to people either. We tend to
Mhm.
override those things because we feel like it's part of it's necessary, it's part of the weight loss, I guess, journey. And so it's all about depletion, but really, like, recovery, rebuilding is so much more important, especially when you've overextended yourself.
Yeah,
So
definitely.
yeah. Were you doing a lot of activity too when you were paleo? Were you doing like a lot of weightlifting and stuff like that? And you just felt like you couldn't recover well? And is that kind of what shifted you over?
Yeah, yeah. Well, and so I have been an athlete, throughout high school and afterwards, and that was definitely some place where I noticed differences. And luckily enough, I've never really struggled with significant health problems, but the symptoms of low energy, of both the feeling just psychologically of not having the ability to focus, and just general fatigue and tiredness, and minor symptoms, the cold hands and feet, and other very common low energy related symptoms.
And you mentioned something about hair loss too. Were you losing hair at an early age?
Yeah, yeah. Well, I don't have the best genes for it, but yeah. So I mean, I would notice it. My friends would notice it, and that was one of the things that kicked off the repeat journey, was finding information about the hair loss, and that was um, noticeably different at the very least. Reduced that or stopped the continuous loss of hair.
That's awesome,
Yeah.
because Danny talks about that a lot and helps people understand that it's not your genes so much as that it is the epigenetics of what's happening to your genes. So it's not so scary when you realize, like, if you're fueling your your basic cellular being, you're not costing something else in terms of follicles needing energy. That's going to be the least of things that the body's going to worry about if you're under stress. So that can be eliminated in the terms of survival, right? You don't need hair to survive.
Right.
Yeah, yeah.
So Jay, tell us about the biggest challenge you have with people, or what people are coming to you with, and what you're helping them with.
Sure. So the biggest challenge is shedding the old beliefs.
Mm.
And there's a lot of them, of course.
Yeah.
And I know you guys know this, but coming from this, there's this fear of food, fear of eating enough, and especially a fear of sugar now. It's one of the biggest ones. But yeah, there's so much misinformation out there. The salad and fish diet, or salad and chicken, and people just survive on that, and it's really changing people's perspectives. And that's one of my biggest focuses, is that I think that one of the bigger problems is people diving into, whether it's Ray Peat's work or really anything, without fully understanding it, and without, they're just kind of jumping from one diet to the next and hoping for some miraculous result, without understanding the meaning behind it, and not really being educated or well-versed in what's going on. So that's really where my focus is I don't want to work with somebody and tell them, here's what you have to eat, here's what you have to do. And instead, it's focusing on what's going on in their body, why it's going on, what foods are going to help, and why, and how it all works.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah.
And I noticed a lot of your articles really structured quite well on one of the, like the themes of most of what people have gotten themselves into. Like you said, the low carb or the low fat, or the, sugar, demonizing sugar. And or the omega-3s and stuff. So what do you find is being kind of easier to kind of help people with, versus still their beliefs that are caught up? What do you find you're kind of breaking through with people?
Yeah, I think that with that education piece, as people garner a better understanding and as they experiment a little bit and notice differences, that's when those breakthroughs happen. And you know, while there's a resistance against, let's say, eating sugar, and of course, I'm not talking about pounds of white sugar, but you know, eating sugar in the foods that we're talking about, you know, people obviously are craving those foods, you know, and once they recognize that those cravings and their hunger aren't evil, you know, there's reasons behind them, you know, physiological reasons behind them. I think that that's one of the bigger turning points is changing that perspective around the feedback that your body's giving you in terms of hunger and cravings and tastes, and why following those to a certain extent is better for your physiology, for our health.
Yeah, it's awesome. Yeah, it's a fine line to help people help themselves, because mostly they are looking for someone to tell them how to do it. You know, what should I eat? How do I eat it? How do I prepare it? What do I, you know? And there's a loss of that self authority and looking for that person to take care of them because they're overwhelmed. And for my own experience of helping people, it's really trying to give them a little and then let them kind of meet you to the point where, you know, you can meet them and then they can kind of keep going. Because the first thing I remember when I was in my own experience is that it just gets overwhelming. You just can't take it all in at once. And so being patient with people, you know, and telling them slow, 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 even though they want to get there fast, it's still very hard for them to understand that even though they're adrenalized and they believe that they can take it in, they're not absorbing it. It's not settling in, you know?
Right. Yeah. And I think that the other important part that you mentioned, Jay, is, you know, to get to know your own physiology first, like help people understand that within themselves. Because really, the better that they can understand how their body is working and functioning, the more that you can guide them. But it is really hard for them to connect and understand that it is going to be sometimes a slower process, like Maya is saying, if they can't connect with the physiological parts of their own self, right? And to get to know that better. So that's really awesome that you're helping people with that. You had mentioned you know, we don't use this word so frequently, but I love this word, actually, the bioenergetic approach.
I love that you just brought that up. I was looking at that word and I was going, oh, I want to ask the question, but she got
No, you can ask it.
No, you already did.
Go ahead. You finish it for me, Maya. That's what we do, right?
So give your definition of bioenergetics, and what do you tell people what it is and how they can utilize it?
Sure. So in a very general sense, I would just say it's how energy relates to our health. And to expand on that a little bit, it's the concept that we can boil virtually any aspects or all aspects of our health down to energy. You know, this is essentially what allows all of our functions. It maintains the structure from a cellular level all the way up. It's what allows us to move. It's what allows us to think. And it's also what underlies any sort of symptom or condition, which these are typically situations of energy deficiencies. So, so I think that looking at health from that point of view completely changes. It changes in a few ways. One, it unifies all of these different principles. So when you look at health from a conventional point of view, you know, you have these symptoms, and the symptoms are the product of these various conditions, but most of the treatments are just focused on the symptoms because the conditions or diseases are typically genetically caused. Whereas, you know, this is, as you kind of mentioned earlier, it's not quite that simple. Of course, there's epigenetic changes that go on, and our environment interacts with our genes. But even from the alternative point of views, you have these people, a lot of people are just, there's such a heavy focus on symptoms and not understanding how they relate to energy and how that is really what underlies the condition. So, for example, you may have a focus on mold toxicity or on EMFs. And from this alternative point of view, the only way to deal with these sorts of environmental insults is to remove them, and I don't know, maybe use a liver supplement. I don't know what people would do from that, but as opposed to considering how EMFs or mold is affecting us on a bioenergetic or from a bioenergetic view, and understanding that by increasing the amount of energy supply we have available, we can deal with those sorts of environmental inputs without having those negative effects. We could consider any of those as stressors, which is simply something that requires energy to deal with, whether it's a toxin that has to be detoxified in our liver, or some other sort of damage to, on a cellular level. All of those things can be repaired or dealt with as long as we have enough energy.
Yeah. I love that you bring that up too, because eliminating the stressor, it seems to be the obvious thing to do, right? And that's the way a lot of people go about it. That's what medical professionals advise people to do more often than not. And you're right. It is also about, a large part of it is being able to handle the stress, because it's not like we're not going to come in contact with these things. And, you can't live in a bubble. So you have to be able to bolster yourself to be able to deal with these stressors. And that's the bioenergetic approach that you're talking about. So having enough energy reserves is what we're talking about here for your metabolism to function, to have the energy to not let those stressors take too much out of your body. So, yeah. And doing, we haven't even mentioned this yet, but I got reminded of this when I just recently visited Atlanta. I saw Maya there, and, I was staying with my family, and everybody still has a microwave. And I'm thinking to myself, wow, I haven't even thought about microwaves in so long, because we got rid of our microwave a long time ago. But a lot of people still use microwaves, and they're in their house. And so that's a constant source of radiation. You're irradiating your food, and you're eating food that has radiation in it. So that one thing, actually, that kind of stress, I would say that would be great to eliminate, right? And, because that's an extra stress you're kind of putting on that isn't necessary. But also at the same time bolstering yourself by giving yourself enough energy reserves. So anyway.
Yeah, I mean, oh, sorry.
No, go ahead.
I was just saying it's two sides of the same coin. So Of course, we want to reduce those stressors that aren't benefiting us. So something like exercise, of course, an excessive amount of exercise is going to require an excessive amount of energy, and that's not going to benefit us. Or, the cost benefit analysis of that is, you're going to have too high of a cost there, but a certain amount of exercise is definitely beneficial, and uses energy. So not everything that's a stressor is inherently bad. And of course, we don't want to live in a mold infested home. I'm not suggesting that we do that and just try to offset it by eating a lot of food. But yeah, just looking at health and disease from that interface completely changes the way you're thinking about it. And especially more so when you're looking at accumulated damage. So when we talk a lot about the chronic conditions, that's more often than not, it's not an individual stressor that you can just remove. It's accumulated damage over time that you can repair and you can regenerate, assuming that you're producing enough energy.
Yeah, I love that. Thank you. Yeah.
So I don't know. I haven't really resolved my own issues about the microwave. And one of the things that I found was that Ray actually doesn't feel that the microwave is that bad.
Oh, really? I didn't know this.
Yeah, and I'm trying to find the article that he mentioned. So one of the things is it's the same thing. How often do you microwave, right?
Yeah.
But the wavelengths supposedly don't. It's like you're totally safe as long as you don't alter the food in so many different ways. If we cook food, we break it down, we do things, but a lot of the things that he talked about in the article, which I'm still searching as I'm talking to you guys, but I'm thinking it's just the same thing. Each stress is a different, like an exercise stress can be a good thing when you're fueled, right? And when you want to get your body into your catabolic state to create more growth, right? Because you want to have a system that balances both ways. You want to have the body do what it naturally does too. It needs a couple of stresses to get better at doing what it hasn't done. But typically from now on, it's kind of like the whole Coke thing, Allison. You had to kind of go around the world to find out that maybe that wasn't as bad as we had thought. And if I find the article, we can attach
That
it to
is
the
surprising
notes.
to me because I remember talking to Lita Lee. I worked with her a long time ago, and her big thing was, like no microwave it too. And I don't know. I
Yeah.
thought that Ray Pete talked about that too, but I don't know. I just don't like things anyway cooked in the microwave. I never really, not really big on that. So I just didn't use it and I didn't want it in my house. So I don't know.
Yeah,
I feel weird about it.
so yeah, it's like you got to do what makes you feel
Yeah.
good. But
Yeah.
supposedly, like what we thought in terms of the molecular breakdown and stuff like that isn't
Yeah.
as bad, especially
Okay.
if you
Yeah.
wrap the food and it doesn't have plastic around it and you're not melting PBA all over it, or BBB or
Right.
whatever.
Okay. That's
But
okay. That's good to know. Then my family's a little healthier than I thought they were.
But these are the
Yeah.
ins and outs of learning repeat, right? This is
Yeah.
this is what I love about it, because
Yeah.
it really challenges everything about what you believe and helps you unlearn for a better reason, right? Because
Right.
I don't know anything about microwaves. I don't know anything about like how the links of light and how those things, but it makes me want to learn, right?
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. Just when you think you knew something, change it.
Yeah, I remember him saying that. I think he was saying that the older microwaves can cause more problems, but the
Okay.
newer ones, I think he said that they aren't that bad. I don't know. If anyone's using one, I still kind of stay a few feet away, but
That's what I do too. I'm like, whoa.
Because you think about like how much more other stresses you got a phone with you, you're standing there in a microwave,
Well, how different, my question is, how different is the microwave from like this may sound like a really dumb question, but who cares?
never.
The airport radiation, like the things that I don't even know what those machines are called, but those are, I mean, I try to avoid those as well.
I think that's like like a microwave on steroids. It's kind of
like way
well,
more
I
strong.
don't have all that information. Do you know this?
it has to do more with the frequency. So
Okay.
my understanding is that there's certain frequencies that interfere more with our natural frequencies that our bodies operate on, and the ones that like the EMFs that are in that range have more, can have more damaging effects on us, whereas ones that are higher or lower don't have as much of an effect.
Yeah, so
Oh,
it's
okay.
similar to like the red light therapy, right? If you're going to you start using red light, you want to know that, certain lights are just warming lights. So other lights are going to do the cellular growth aspect. It's going to help the respiration and all that. So these wavelengths and stuff change as the frequencies change, right?
Right. Yeah. I mean, they go together. So yeah, wavelengths, frequencies, the different wavelength. There's certain wavelengths that have beneficial effects, like you're saying, like the red light, and even certain ones within red light. And then there's others that, based on the ranges that our bodies operate in, can have more harmful effects. I don't know too much of the details about it, but
yeah, that's something I've been playing with and doing work with, but we definitely need to do a show about that, because a lot of that is incorporated with a lot of the interviews that Ray Pete talks about in terms of light and how essential it is, especially when we get into the winter months and weather conditions that are longer in the winter months because the cellular respiration is inhibited as well. So we'll have to think about that as a show.
But I think, yeah, definitely. Let's do that for another topic show down the line. But I know, like, just right off the top of my head, I know the red light helps with certain enzymes to be produced that you can't produce in the winter time because you don't have the sunlight. I'm pretty sure it has something to do with that. Yeah. So helps with digestion and increasing metabolism. So, yeah.
So, Jay, what do you find that you want to focus on with your clients in terms of weight loss? You talk about helping them and in because the reason why I'm asking this question is because people have a misconstrued of what weight loss is, right? From just the simple, are you losing fat, are you using muscle, or how are you kind of losing something, right? So what do you help them with in terms of knowing that weight loss has a bigger scope than sometimes we give it?
Yeah. So obviously the goal for most people who want to lose weight is losing fat. And the typical suggestion is to, either reduce calories, or what's becoming more common now is reducing carbohydrates. And
Right.
as far as reducing carbohydrates goes, at first there's a significant amount of water weight that's lost because glycogen is lost, which holds onto water with it. And then also potentially bloating and other digestive issues that are resolved by not consuming carbohydrates. Maybe not resolved, but the symptoms are alleviated. So that can also result in water weight. So when you remove carbs from the diet, you see that sort of weight loss in the beginning, and then after that, it's a low calorie diet after that point ends up being pretty similar to a low carbohydrate diet, where you're basically losing weight via stress. So you're breaking down a significant portion of muscle tissue and other tissue to provide your body with sugar to produce energy. And so of course that results in losing muscle and other fat-free mass.
And you incorporate the ideas of the loss of carbon dioxide too, in terms of letting go of the carbs.
Yeah. So that's one of the bigger reasons why carbohydrates are. One of the biggest differences between carbohydrate oxidation and fat oxidation is the production of carbon dioxide. So you would be producing much less carbon dioxide when you're not eating enough carbohydrates.
Yeah. And so then you lose the amount of energy stored in the liver. And so even though you get more water retention or in the cells, it's actually being utilized versus being stuck and increasing and causing more estrogen, right?
Yeah. So, you touched on a few things there, but
I try to not go into the dichotomy of everything, but, just kind of getting to the understanding of points so that what we know, what you're saying to your clients is kind of helping us to keep helping other people know why this work is so important, right? Why weight loss can't always mean fast.
Yeah. Well, and so the way that I typically would consider weight gain, which I think is an easier way to look at it, is that when we're not producing enough energy or when energy production is inhibited, the food that we're consuming is being shunted towards body fat as opposed to being used to produce energy. So to take the opposite of that scenario, the goal is to improve mitochondrial respiration, which is energy production, so that the food that we eat becomes energy and then used as energy as opposed to being stored as fat. So there's, a lot of intricacies in what's going on there, but, some of the biggest things are reducing PUFA, which inhibits mitochondrial respiration, improving gut function, and because endotoxin also inhibits mitochondrial respiration, and making sure that we're getting all the nutrients that we need so that we can produce energy. So those are the three biggest things that I focus on, both from a weight loss, or I should say fat loss perspective, but also as far as improving chronic conditions, because again, all of it keeps boiling down to energy.
Right. And we just talked to Paul Check, and, he reminded us, it took you a while to gain that weight. It didn't just all of a sudden overnight happen. It's just that when you don't pay attention to what's happening to your body, all of a sudden you just get fed up with what's happening. So then there's this rush to, I have to lose weight in time for something, or I have to lose weight because my doctor told me to, and then there's just this shortening of the process of the body releasing it in a healthy way. And then you can go into certain things, but then you kind of push yourself into, aging and causing more inflammation and stuff.
The other issue is recovery. People they don't actually know how or the process of recovering. I use like having a baby as a great example for women. So they want to lose the weight as quickly as possible, but not realizing that it takes a couple of years to really, for the body to fully recover from that. But it's been in a depleted state for a while. So it needs to have time to bring in all the resources again. But yet a lot of women actually go in the opposite direction and do more activity and eat less during that time. So it ends up putting them in a severe low energy state. And then, that's when you get all the other issues where you have, you're not getting sleep. Your brain's not really working at that moment because, so really you need food so bad during that time. And I think a lot of women that I talk to actually who are breastfeeding eat pretty well when they're breastfeeding, but it's like when you're ready to start losing the weight, women really freak out. And I get that. I've been there, I've done that. But I think, our body may take on a little bit because we're recovering. We're trying to balance it out, the metabolism, but, and that's kind of a natural process. But, I think you've just been taught it's just, you just drop that weight and you can do it real quick. And all you need to do is cut calories and work out more. Now, like you said, Jay, cutting carbohydrates is the new thing. So, it's not really new, but it's now back on the list of the thing to do. So, but yeah, I think if we're not thinking about like recovery, you may gain a little weight, especially if you're coming from a surgery, you're coming from childbirth. There's going to be that phase of rebalancing.
Yeah. Well, and you touched on something really important, which is the focus now is often placed on losing the weight as opposed to being healthy.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
And assuming that your body is healthy over time, you should naturally be at a healthy body fat level. But because the focus is on weight, and you have this eat less, exercise more recommendation, which is extremely pervasive, then you have people losing weight at the cost of their health. And then it ends up either causing other problems or you gain the weight back or both. And it's not sustainable and it doesn't work.
Yeah. And you've already lost a lot of muscle mass. So there's always that aspect of how that fat is able to come back onto the body faster versus, having something to burn it, so, and there's a reversing of being a bad glucose burner, or kind of helping that body know that you're going to be giving it a little bit each time so the body can regenerate with it, instead of trying to take it all in at once because it's like, oh, I just got what I needed, and then trying to, disperse it around the body. So one of the things you on your website talk about is hyperthyroidism. And do you work with people with thyroid medications? Do you work with supplementation, or do you just work with nutritional food, or how do you kind of help that?
Yeah, I think supplements can definitely be helpful. All of it depends on the circumstances of any individual person, but I definitely think supplements can be helpful to fill in some gaps if people don't like liver, let's say.
Right. Do you recommend Kate Deering's book?
Yeah, I do like Kate Deering's book for sure. I've definitely recommended that. And as far as, I can't prescribe medication myself. I'm not a doctor, but I do think that supplementing thyroid in certain scenarios can be helpful. But I think that we have to be careful with supplementation, especially a lot of the pro-metabolic supplements, whether it's caffeine or the steroid hormones like progesterone or pregnenolone and thyroid, because people want this quick fix and they go for the supplements, and it when you don't have the fuel and you're not producing energy to deal with it, it can also kind of cause more problems than you started with. So it's definitely a treacherous road that you need to navigate carefully.
Right.
I agree. Well, I just wanted to hear a little bit more about that, Jay. Like, can you go into detail about problems you've seen people have because they're doing that kind of supplementation before their body's really ready to take it?
Yeah, well, it's very similar to the low energy state that most people would start with. So whether it's somebody dealing with anxiety or some sort of autoimmune condition that they're worried about flare-ups, any of those, any sort of chronic condition or symptom, whether it's tiredness or a skin rash, any of those that are going on, in that low energy state, if you're then trying to reverse it by taking one of those metabolically stimulating supplements, you can end up in that same low energy state with those same sorts of symptoms. Kind of like, it's almost like another stressor. Although,
Right.
well, you could say it is. I mean, you could say it's similar to exercise and a pill. I mean,
Oh,
not
yeah,
exactly,
yeah.
but obviously exercise. Yeah, exercise.
Yeah.
Coined it. That's
Oh,
perfect.
yeah. I like that too. And
Exercise and a pill.
yeah, exactly.
And it
So
has benefits,
so
but
it
you just have to have the
increases
fuel.
yeah, right. It does have benefits. But yeah, what you're saying, I think is what I'm hearing is that you're increasing your energy expenditure and your energy needs. But if you're not putting that energy in and you're taking only the supplements without eating more food, then you're gonna crash.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And so like exercise, there are specific benefits to these supplements. But so the way that I would think about it is that something like thyroid, for example, or pregnenolone or progesterone, they're important for regeneration and repair and restructuring as long as the energy is there. So if there's enough of an energy supply, that it's kind of like directing the energy towards improving the structure. But if there's not enough energy there, it causes stress. It's a stressor that ends up causing stress, and then you have the same deterioration that you're trying to reverse.
That's great. Yeah. I think that's a really interesting point, because anytime I feel like I've always tried to really understand the supplementation a lot better and how to use it myself. I don't think I have it yet even, but this, it does help when you're reminded, yes, you need more energy, because it will ramp up your metabolism and anything that does that. So it's better to take those things slow and actually have some kind of a system that you use them with, or guidance, because otherwise, if you're just taking them whenever and not giving yourself the fuel, it's not gonna work out too well.
Well, I think we also have to help people understand like what they got taught with, like, certain chiropractors came out with the idea that supplements were better than food because the food itself wasn't to a good level, so we got into the whole idea
Yeah.
of organic, and we got into GMO issues, and so knowing that your digestion, you couldn't digest as much nutrients as you need because the food was less than what it
Yeah.
has. But I think that kind of got people into a role of believing that this perfect pill has all the nutrients that you ever need in one thing. And,
Yeah.
And you can kind of help them understand, well, you have to digest that too. But the thing is, it doesn't do what food does, right?
Right.
And I think that has been a big issue for most people, is because they believed that this supplement's going to help versus the food that low nutrient food that supposedly is missing everything because it's not being farmed correctly.
Right. I remember when that dogma had started, I remember practitioners telling me that the soil is now totally depleted and the food isn't nutrient dense anymore. And I'm just like, how is that possible? And so I think it was just basically a ploy to sell supplements, I'm sure that the intentions were somewhat good, but I think for the most part, that's what started it, to get people to trust less in their own bodies and in the food they're taking in, and more like having to buy something. So,
Everything
yeah.
was made easy, right?
Yeah,
How
totally.
easy can you make something?
And it's not actually easy. If you're doing that, you're having to actually, you're working harder to help your liver work better. And like Jay said, to keep your energy up, to detox all that stuff. But I wanted to ask, okay, so I definitely want to get on the subject of sugar, because for number one, I feel like it's a big like demon right now in the nutrition industry. And especially with the low carb movement, and people, of course, wanting to lose weight and just really quickly. So, but I feel like even more so now, because people are doing those kinds of things, they're going to be less likely to bring back sugar they're going to have to do it really slow, because otherwise they're going to have major issues. And so they're having a hard time metabolizing sugar because either they've cut it out for so long or they've got so much stress in their life where they're just not able to take it in because of the high cortisol levels or the digestive distress. Jay, can you talk a little bit more about why people would be intolerant to sugar and that issue?
Yeah, definitely. And this ties in with part of why the low carb movement has gained so much momentum is that you have people who do have certain chronic conditions, or they're trying to lose weight, and they go to these low carb ketogenic diets and they improve. And sometimes they can improve from various conditions, at least for a period of time, but sometimes, it's for a substantial amount of time. And there's some benefit, but you have to consider the context. So in a situation where you're consuming, let's say, a lot of polyunsaturated fats, your gut health isn't great and you have a lot of endotoxin being produced, both of those compounds are going to inhibit respiration. It's going to inhibit glucose oxidation. So when you're consuming a regular amount of carbs and you have a lot of PUFA or a lot of endotoxin, you're not able to actually use the carbs. So going on the low carb or ketogenic diet, you then have these benefits where typically the gut clears up because carbohydrates can be difficult to digest. And then B, you're not consuming the glucose anymore. So you don't have all these carbs sitting around that can't be used. Right. So you go from this extremely low energy state where you have a lot of glucose that you can't use, and you're not really burning fat, because when you have a lot of glucose present, less fat is being produced. You have less free fatty acids, you have fewer, you're not producing ketones. But then you switch to a low carb diet where your body isn't using carbohydrates at all, and it starts ramping up its fat oxidation. It starts increasing ketogenesis, and then you have a fuel now to produce energy from. So it's better than that original state for sure, where at least you're getting some amount of energy being produced, and that can be enough to really allow people to improve their health for a period of time. But either it doesn't last, but regardless of that, it's still not ideal. So you then have to consider how to correct those other issues so that then you can use carbohydrates and produce energy from those, which are better for supplying energy and much less stressful.
What do you tell the type 2 diabetics in terms of what's going on with them and how the insulin resistance? You have a great article that I was looking at about insulin resistance and diabetes, but what is the conversation you have with them so they can understand?
Thanks. Yeah. So that's a perfect example of this state where you aren't able to produce energy from glucose. So that's why people find benefits from the low carb or keto diets. But yeah, the way that I would explain it is that so the current idea surrounding diabetes is that insulin is not able to function because insulin is not able to function, sugar is not able to enter the cells. And so the issue centers around this transport of sugar into the cells, but that's not really what's going on. What's actually going on is our cells aren't able to produce energy from sugar. So you can't, so there's a buildup of sugar in the cells, which prevents more sugar from coming in. So that's why insulin can't do its job. It's not because the cells are quote unquote resistant to it, or I guess the reason that I would say that they're resistant to it is because glucose oxidation is being inhibited.
Right.
So when talking to someone who's diabetic or has that insulin resistance, the focus, and again, it all comes down to the same conversation, but it's all focusing on improving glucose oxidation so that you can use carbohydrates, and then insulin will work fine. It's never been an insulin problem until you get way farther down the line and you stop producing insulin. But that's
one of the things I keep thinking about is the body will hold on to something that it doesn't get a lot of, right? And then all of a sudden you create this need for the insulin to kind of keep being burned up, being used. And then you're in a depletion, and it says the body's going, well, we don't make any more. Well, you don't need to make any more when your body is registering that it already has something. So one of the issues that, and if you can correct me if I'm kind of going in the wrong direction, but this is how I kind of see how to kind of simplify like why you want to keep giving yourself some sugar in moderate and with meals and in ways that your body produces it and works with it in its regular system, not let's just, eat sugar all day long.
Yeah, definitely. I do think it's important to address though why in whoever, in this diabetic person, why they aren't able to use the sugar. I think that that's the main thing to address. And then, it's not eating, like spreading it out and eating amounts of, sugar with the meals to keep blood sugar stable, which is kind of a whole other topic, but a related one.
Yeah. So, and why, could you tell our listeners why people can't use that sugar? Because I don't think people really understand that part.
Yeah, I can explain that a little more. So, okay. So when you have sugar in the cells, it needs to go through a process called mitochondrial respiration to produce ATP. It also produces carbon dioxide, and both ATP and carbon dioxide hold energy that our cells need to function. So there are several factors that affect the production of ATP from glucose. And I would boil it down to three of the most important ones. And the first would be nutrient deficiency. So you need certain nutrients in order for that process to occur. B vitamins are really important. You have magnesium and several different minerals. So that's kind of part one. If you don't have those minerals, glucose can't be used to produce ATP. The second would be polyunsaturated fats. So those are able to directly kind of stop the process of oxidation of glucose. And then the last one would be endotoxin, which again, it has direct effects on mitochondrial respiration. So by addressing those factors, then you can restore proper energy production.
Thank you. That was a good way of
that was really great.
You're welcome.
So what would be your guidance or tips on how to get someone started to take in sugar again if they're in that state or if they've cut it out for a long time?
Yeah, so I think assuming those things are addressed, I would typically start with a fruit juice. I typically go with orange juice. The couple of reasons for that is that the starchy carbohydrates and some of the starch and fibers in fruits can be difficult to digest. So especially coming from someone who doesn't have, isn't in that high energy state yet, and their digestive function still isn't ideal, I would go with fruit juice. And, you get sugar in there and you get vitamins and minerals, and orange juice is probably the best one that we have available in the US. So,
yeah, that's great.
Plus the vitamin C, right? Which helps the E and helps everything else, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Well, and one more comment I want to make about that, because I feel like we all know why it's important to bring back carbohydrates into the diet, but a lot of people would be like, well, if I'm losing weight and I have a flatter belly and my digestion's better, why would I do anything different? Why would I want to take in carbohydrates again? And you mentioned a little bit, well, it only lasts for so long, right? Mm-hmm. And then you have to make a change. So what did you find? I can just off the top of my head, we talked about low energy already being something that could happen. You just don't have the energy reserves to actually combat the stress that's coming at you. What else can you add to that, Jay?
So over time, there's typically going to be degeneration that goes on, and it presents in all sorts of ways. So it can be fatigue, it can be infertility, it can be PMS, it can be some sort of more, some sort of chronic condition. And it typically goes that way for most people who aren't eating a healthy diet or living a healthy lifestyle. It kind of all tends in that direction, and doing that sort of low carb diet or low calorie diet that keeps your belly flat, over time, it doesn't last, and you may gain the weight, or if not, the degeneration typically occurs somewhere else.
Well, it's the increase of the cortisol, right? The cortisol starts to get more of an issue, because where you find chronic fatigue, like you said, where people, name it as adrenal fatigue or anything like that, you're still having that insult of the stress hormones coming at you where you can't protect yourself. So more inflammation, more issues coming for aches and pains, joint dysfunctions, stuff like that.
Loss of muscle mass is a big one
Mm-hmm.
because that can create more estrogen as you lose muscle.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
yeah. Yeah. So yeah, that was a great explanation of all that. I really appreciate that, Jay. Thank you.
You're welcome. And maybe I would also add, just while we're talking about stress hormones, especially with Ray Peat's work, there can be, I think, sometimes too much of there's kind of an excessive focus on the hormones. Not that they aren't important, but I think it's important to understand their role.
Mm-hmm.
And in talking about energy, and cortisol and adrenaline and those stress hormones particularly, they're basically a way that our body produces energy when it doesn't have enough available.
Mm-hmm.
So when you don't have enough available, let's say it's when you're on a run, is typically when people think about it, and the adrenaline kicks in it's kind of like to kick in that backup system. So it can produce energy, and it just comes at a cost. It comes at a cost of breaking down muscle tissue or other degeneration.
And that's where it's hard for people to realize, like, a consistent endurance cardio constantly gives you the high, but it doesn't necessarily help you repair on the other side. So endurance sports tend to show up with a loss of muscle mass. You find it in people who can't stop doing this routine that they have because they're so used to that influx. It's like, I have to have that feeling. I need to get rid of my stress, so I go and push my body to that point where that kicks over into the adrenaline, and then you're feeling good, right? But then after you run or whatever, you're collapsing on the ground. No, I'm just kidding.
Yeah.
You're just kind of really tired. You're just tired, you're fatigued, your brain
or you have an injury that doesn't repair, whatever.
right. Yeah.
And so the stress hormones are a way to force that energy production, and when you don't have a lot of energy available, that can feel good. And an interesting aside about that is there's this assumption that the stress hormones are tied directly to psychological stress. And I think that leads people astray, where when people talk about cortisol in general, they just think of like a stressful lifestyle. And psychological stress will increase stress hormones because it uses energy, and when there's not enough energy available, you feel stressed out. But along with that, cortisol is not just the result of a psychological state. It's
and it contributes to the slowing down of the motility and then causing increase of serotonin, which is another reason why people get confused about why serotonin isn't as happy drug that we all think it is. It causes a lot more issue of that increase that constantly keeps the brain having to, have emotional breakdowns, or you're feeling, stressed when you can't even tie your shoe. It's like these things are emotionally impacted because your brain is suffering too. I mean, there is a oversensitivity that comes from the body craving something, and it's saying, I need more attention, so I'm going to send out more signals. And so this is where the neurology part comes in. But this is where it's important to know what you're doing to your brain versus with your body,
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I just heard, the serotonin thing, people still think it's healthy and they think it's a happy hormone. Thank you. And because I just heard Ben Greenfield say something about serotonin the other day, and I was like, wow, it's just God. So, and even some of the drug companies are realizing that actually, I think some of the antidepressant drugs are actually decreasing serotonin now. So they're even kind of catching on, but a lot of the fitness professionals are not. So could you add a little bit of your knowledge, Jay, about what you know about serotonin and how that's not really a good thing to produce in the gut?
Yeah, sure. So it's pretty common knowledge that most of the serotonin we produce is produced in the gut. And there's evidence that is more of the result of impaired digestive function and consuming harder to digest foods, and increases the production of serotonin and also endotoxin. Yeah, I like to think of serotonin as the hibernation and numbing hormone. And so you do see with someone who is struggling with depression and taking those kinds of drugs, sometimes, I don't know if you want to call it the benefit, but you have that numbing effect. And it's a similar, it's similar to that hibernating effect. And serotonin, in hibernating animals is shown to be kind of the factor that regulates that hibernation. So it's like a lot of other stress hormones, it can make you feel good, but that doesn't make it the feel good hormone. Like cortisol or adrenaline, you can feel good with those too.
Yeah.
But yeah, I definitely wouldn't consider it beneficial.
So talk a little bit about the dopamine aspect. Do you know of how, because we're leaning into the idea of when people start having high serotonin in the gut, they also start to have the psychological aspects. And so they might use Xanax, or they might use some SSRI or something that kind of will inhibit something to get something out of it. So it will calm you down. So Xanax will keep your anxiety from flaring up, right? But then it takes away from the dopamine and then creates the GABA issues. Can you kind of reverse and kind of go back in? Can you do that?
Yeah, a little bit. I mean,
only to a certain point. You don't have to go.
Yeah, sure. Well, GABA is an inhibitory neurotransmitter, which, as you said, Xanax has effects on the GABA receptor, acts like GABA. So you do have that inhibition of something like anxiety or excitation that would keep people awake at night, taking Xanax to sleep. But yeah, I mean, again, I would kind of circle back and just say that all of these hormones are products of our energetic state. And
that's true.
By correcting that, you reduce the amount of serotonin that's produced, you increase the amount of dopamine that's produced, and it completely changes the way you think and perceive the world. And there's this, again, another assumption that our brains and our outlook on life and our thoughts are separate from our physiology, and they're not. They're directly affected by one another. And when your body is in a healthier state, when it has more energy, you're able to see things in a different light. You might not take something as seriously, or you might not get as upset about something because you both literally and figuratively have the energy to handle it.
Yeah.
That's great.
It's definitely a reason for why people need to understand more of why this is keeping you in a state of fighting yourself. A lot of people think, oh, it's just willpower. I need to be stronger. I'm not good enough. I need to push harder. And that concept, like there's a book out, I haven't read it, but other people have told me about it. It's called Living with the Seal. And I don't know if do you guys know this?
I feel like I've heard of it. Yeah.
So this is basically a guy who his wife started Spanx, and she and him, he's one of the guys who basically gets into everything, like any kind of new thing. And so he, for 30 days, supposedly has a Navy SEAL live with him. And they do insane workouts. He's, at 4:30 in the morning, even though he's a, CEO of anything, he still has to get these certain workouts in. And there's a big discussion about how the SEAL was supposed to do this insane amount of running. And I guess it would be like running a 100K or 100 miler, right? Or something to get. So he breaks both feet, his metatarsals, right?
Oh, wow.
And supposedly to get the completion, you had to complete it. And he pushed himself the rest of the way through. And then in the book, supposedly the guys, why don't you go to a doctor? And he goes, no, I earned that pain. I'm really proud of this pain. And this pain is I'm going to enjoy it. And I'm like, that's the discussion that we're having underneath all this, is people really feel, that it's really important to push themselves, to compress themselves into this, like, well, I'll beat this. I'll make sure I'm stronger.
But yet pleasure is forbidden. We're not allowed to have pleasure. That's, you have to be, feel guilty or be critical about that. And I just think that's just so backwards.
Yeah.
We're influenced by the brain, right? The brain seeking something. So we drive it through our intellect versus knowing our physiology, right?
Right.
Yeah. Sure. Thanks. So there's this, as you're kind of talking about, there's this constant fight that's going on. And a lot of times, we can talk about it and how it manifests with food, where people are just trying to will themselves to eat less. and, just deal with the hunger, but power through it. And you're stronger if you can do that. And anybody who's overweight is weak because they just succumb to those feelings. And there's obviously a ton of problems with thinking of it that way.
Yeah, because they're strong as heck if they can carry all that weight around. If you really take it counts. There's proof to it. It's just but it's really this mentality that you're a lazy person because you're overweight.
Yeah, well, and there's physiological aspects to that too, where you're hungrier when your body's producing less energy. So those that are naturally or not naturally, but those who are overweight or obese, they're going to naturally feel hungrier because that's evidence that they're not producing energy and that the food that they're eating is just becoming body fat. So in that sort of low energy state, and it's actually really interesting, people talk about this with fructose as far as how it regulates leptin, and this causes overconsumption of fructose. But fructose, by increasing ATP production in both the liver and the hypothalamus of the brain, regulates hunger. So when our brains, and in this case liver, are producing enough energy, then the signals, which leptin is one of those, but the signals that regulate our hunger work properly. And yeah, I mean, it kind of goes along, kind of circling away, but to circle back to the whole idea of willpower and kind of willing ourselves to work harder, willing ourselves to exercise harder. I really find that when you correct the dysfunctions that are going on, and you kind of like remove the blocks, and everything else can flows, it all flows. And so there's this assumption that we have no innate drive to do anything, and that we just have to power through it and force ourselves to work or force ourselves to do whatever. But when you relieve yourselves of those physiological dysfunctions, then there's that innate drive that's there, whether it's creativity or, well, I mean, everyone has some, creativity manifests in many different ways, but that kind of innate drive comes out, and it's quite the opposite of this whole forcing yourself to work and forcing yourself to
and that's when it's not work, right? You have the energy to do it, and it's pleasurable. It's not work, and that's when you know that then your energy is good.
I appreciate you talking about the leptin part, because there was a division back when Matt Stone was involved, and
the doctor, what was his name that came out with a video about that?
Talking about Robert Lustig with the fructose, or is this
the leptin idea?
Well, I mean, he was talking about leptin in the context of fructose, so I don't know if that's what.
Maybe that
I think you're right. I just know Matt Stone had brought that issue up when Ray Peat's stuff was coming out into the forefront, and people were getting confused because of the process of the leptin and whether or not you increased fat gain because you were influencing yourself with fructose, basically.
Yeah. So there's this concept of leptin resistance, which, like insulin resistance, the assumption is that the more that you stimulate leptin, the more resistant our cells get. And as we talked earlier, that's not how it works with insulin resistance. It has to do with being able to properly oxidize glucose. But so there's a similar situation with leptin resistance, where leptin resistance occurs when there's not enough ATP in the hypothalamus and in the liver. Those were kind of the two main sites that I saw that it has important activity in. So by improving energy production, which fructose does in the liver and in the hypothalamus, then you essentially can reverse leptin resistance. And there's a lot of misconceptions that I know Dr. Robert Lustig brought out with all of his anti-fructose talk.
Yes, I remember that. Yeah. That was, I think, during the time I was getting kind of switching over to Ray Peat, and that was confusing to me. I was like, this doesn't make any sense.
It's interesting you say that, because I did a high school project talking about that presentation in favor of it, because I didn't know any better at the time. I thought that this was really great. I thought the soda tax was a good idea. And unfortunately, now it's actually coming to fruition, and known in at least a couple of places, which I think is a problem on many levels.
Yeah. No, it's good to kind of talk about this, because I think a lot of times what we're doing is unlearning things. Like, we get into knowing certain things, and then as we dive deeper, we're like, well, that wasn't true. and it can kind of constantly opening up the doorway to let people understand why this is another thing to look at. It's the same concept that you're not getting enough of something to create the respiration of the cells. The cell isn't doing its job, and then it's holding on to things because it can't function, and it's saying, I'm not letting go of any of it until you give me what I need. And that's a survival mechanism, right? So it's kind of finding that part of like the discussion is in every part of the physiology, you're going back to kind of the same ideas, right?
Yeah.
And that's why education is such an important piece to this. And I fell into it myself when I was younger, where somebody says that this is the effect, and you take that for truth, whether or not, you look into it yourself. And it can be difficult to look into it yourself. And there's always going to be information, you can only go so deep, but I think it's extremely important to try to educate yourself as much as you can. And that's where you get your power from. If you don't understand what's going on, then you're helpless, and you're forced to sign up for, have someone tell you what to do, have someone tell you what medication to take or what foods to eat, as opposed to having, working to have some sort of understanding of that for yourself.
And I'll add, once you think you do know something, keep learning, because you don't. That's the hard part.
It might change.
It's not. It's automatic. You forget to sit there and say to yourself, "Oh my gosh, I just became my worst nightmare because I can't take any more information, and I think I've collected so much information." But it's still this filtration. Like your adaptation is to find a way to take. Let me look at it again. Let me keep looking at it, because as we're progressing, even the science is catching up faster and faster, and we're still trying to, what we're learning about the brain and what it does and how it's working. And there's so many other things that are, science is saying, okay, well, I can look at this atom, that's exploding, and I can, we can kind of see the reactions now, and, and what we don't know in 20 years is in the future is going to be changing all of this in some ways too. So
and experiencing it, giving your time to experience it, figuring out what works for you, and is so important. And instead of just taking in all the information and believing it without really practicing it.
Experimentation is a huge portion, because if for no other reason than that you can't know all of the information. And as Maya pointed out, there's always new information coming out there. And if you don't have an open mind to it, you're kind of going to end up stuck. But the experimentation is also kind of the way that you manifest what you're learning, and see if what you expect to happen happens. And if not, you go back to the drawing board.
Yeah. Right. Which is why I love the idea that people are, you're like what you call yourself, or you're a self, researcher of yourself and researcher of your own study. It's not you're the individual that comes into knowing that you're consistently looking at what else can I learn, right?
Right. Yeah. So thanks, Jay. Do you have anything to add? Any other tips or anything you want to leave with people, or any ideas?
Nothing comes to mind.
You gave us a lot of great information. Appreciate that. Actually, this was great, because we tend to do topic shows and we talk about certain things, but sometimes we don't always go into certain areas. And today I felt like we went into some areas that I had really wanted to talk about. So thank you.
Great. Thanks for having me.
Yeah. Can you tell our audience, give our audience an idea of where to find you and how to contact you if they want to look at your services and hire you for coaching and that kind of thing?
Yeah, absolutely. So I have a website. It's jfeldmanwellness.com. And on Instagram and Facebook and LinkedIn is J Feldman Wellness. You can reach out to me through the website. I have services, there's a services tab there, and I do one-on-one consultation. And I also have a 7-week online course that
tell us a little bit about that. I saw that on your website. Is that a nutritional course that you're offering there?
Yeah, so the focus is on nutrition, and it came from working with clients, and I was repeating myself, and people weren't really understanding that what to do they understood that, and then everything else went in one ear and out the other. So the focus is really on education, and taking the time to learn why you're doing what you're doing and learn how to determine what to eat and what to do using that information. So that you can find all that information on my website as well.
Great. Yeah. Thank you, Jay. We appreciate it.
All right. Thank you, guys.
All right.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.